Welcome to TrustTalk. Our guest today is Michael Kende. He has a Ph.D. in economics from MIT and is a digital development consultant at the World Bank Group, a senior advisor at Analysys Mason, and the board chair of the Datasphere Initiative, and until recently, Chief Economist of the Internet Society. He has done a significant amount of work on promoting Internet development in emerging regions around the world. He works on the economics of cybersecurity as a means to reduce data breaches and increase trust in the Internet. The Internet has brought us numerous free services like contacting people, creating online content, video conferencing, sharing videos, communicating, and working online. But it comes at a price, as the data we put online, some of it very personal, raises privacy issues, makes us vulnerable to cyber attacks, and results in a concentration of power in large companies and governments. He talks about trust and the privacy paradox, and the flip side of free services that Internet provides. The way to grow trust is through technology and regulation, giving the example of the automobile industry, where in the 60s there were no safety regulations until Ralph Nader's book in 1965, Unsafe at Any Speed. He talks about the European GDPR directive, the Datasphere Initiative, and contact tracing apps, like the Etaraz app Qatar required people to use during the Soccer World Cup. Your host today, Severin de Wit.
Michael, welcome to TrustTalk. In our introduction, we mentioned your role in the Datasphere Initiative, a global network of stakeholders aiming to build a more equitable and inclusive digital society. Its goal is to achieve a new, holistic and positive approach to data governance. So how does trust fit into this?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation and the chance to talk about this important topic. The Datasphere Initiative is really a reaction to a lot of the issues of digital trust that we're going to talk about. Data is, I wouldn't say the new oil, but it is a currency. It is increasingly being gathered, and governance of that data is going to be increasingly important to us, where it goes, how it's being used, what happens with it. And this is, I think, a very important initiative, and I'm really pleased to be a part of it, to help make sense of governance, to help find approaches and ways that governance can be improved within a country and cross-border data flows between countries.
In preparation for the podcast, initially I suggested as the topic of our interview Trust and the Internet, a not very current title when you consider that we have had the Internet since the 1st of January 1983. So in a few weeks we celebrate 40 years of Internet.
It does seem a bit surprising, and thanks for the invitation to discuss this. I think originally security was just not built into the Internet. The pioneers are on record saying they just thought they would be able to control who was going online because they conceived of it as a research and academic network. And they really didn't anticipate that we'd be using it for banking, for social media, for dating, for access to infrastructure such as electric utilities. So with all the attacks that we continue to hear about and more awareness of the use of our data, digital trust has become a critical issue, both for people who still haven't gone online and for those of us online for what we're doing online.
When choosing the subject, I was triggered by your 2021 book, The Flipside of Free, Understanding the Economics of Internet. You explain why free comes at a price, the cost of free internet services in terms of privacy, cybersecurity, and the growing market power of technology giants. What is your main mantra of the book?
Great question, yes. So the idea is first to explain why these things are free and the benefits that we're getting out of those. The ability to contact people now, to make phone calls, to video conference, to do podcasts, to do things online with the government, to work online. All of these things that we saw really accelerated during the lockdowns and the pandemic. But we have to consider the flip sides. All of these things put our data online, and the data that we're putting online, some of it is very personal, so we're more and more concerned about our privacy. Some of it is subject to cybersecurity attacks, as are many of the infrastructure that we rely on, that we might not even know are attached to the internet. And as the companies grow, we're starting to become more and more concerned about the concentration of power in these companies And as we see with Twitter, what one company or one owner can do to really what he calls the public square of the internet.
You investigate the economics of modern information society and especially, of course, internet economics. In the second part of your book, The Flipside of Free, you discuss the paradoxes of trust and privacy. What are those paradoxes?
Well, the privacy paradox refers to the fact that even when people learn about the risks of sharing data, there's little evidence that they use it less and less. People understand now more and more that what they're putting online, and they can see the impact of data breaches and other attacks on the internet, but there's very little evidence that we're using the internet more, certainly for what we're doing every day, our day-to-day. The trust paradox is that even the companies that have been hacked rarely go out of business. People keep using them, people keep relying on them, so they're not reacting to trust breaches in ways that we might expect. And the issue here is really that there are clearly benefits to all of these services. And as human beings, even offline, we're used to trading off immediate gratification or immediate benefits against possible future harms. Every time a smoker picks up a cigarette pack, they can read clearly on the label the potential harms. Not everyone wears seatbelts. Many people stopped wearing masks during the pandemic or refused to wear them. So we're always used to these kinds of things, and now we're seeing that translated online, that human behavior offline continues to hold online.
In your book, you write, it's possible that a new metric is needed to measure market power, especially when services are offered for free. Where normally a profitable increase in price was a strong metric, the new metric may be the ability to profitably gather data and monetize it through advertising without losing market share. So far the quote. Do you endorse the current business model using data for profit?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that we're all benefiting from that. That's the benefits of the free services, and they have to pay for themselves somehow. I think people like free. Free is a very special price for us. Economic experiments have shown that people respond very favorably to free, and the flip side is if someone raised the price of a formerly free service, people would not enjoy that. Imagine if you had to pay even a penny or a fraction of a penny for every Google search. So I do endorse it, but of course, some of the data we're now seeing is being misused or used in ways that we're not always clear about. And as the companies grow, there's an increase in concentration of the data. And that is something that we're all grappling with, both in our personal lives and the governments are trying to figure out a way to deal with this.
I can very much relate to that because I was thinking what you just said about Twitter, initially free, and now they're struggling to see how they can to change it into a paid model.
Right. Well, it helps if you don't chase away all of your advertisers by opening the floodgates.
True. Many experts say lack of trust will not be a barrier to increase public reliance on the internet. I think you just mentioned that. Those who are hopeful that trust will grow expect technical and regulatory change will combat users' concerns about security and privacy. What is your view on this?
Well, first, I think a lack of trust may not impact our current usage, as I was just saying. This is kind of the privacy trust paradox. But I do think it can have an impact going forward on increasing our reliance on the internet. Some people may be happy to have an Alexa in their living room, potentially listening to what they're saying, but they wouldn't put one in their bedroom. Other people may never really trust a self-driving car because they see what's happening with websites and with other devices, and they wouldn't put themselves in a car that they can't control. So going forward, I think there is going to be an impact. But I do agree that the way to grow trust is through technology and regulation, ultimately. The industry has had years and years to address it, and so far we've seen the results of that. And you can go back for an analog to the automobile industry in the 1960s. There was no regulation, basically no safety measures. Cars only had lap belts in the front, and they were optional. And then Ralph Nader writes the book in 1965, Unsafe at Any Speed, highlighting the lack of safety. And eventually the US government got involved, starting with seatbelt laws. Then came airbags, crash testing, safety ratings, built-in restraints for infant seats. And importantly, a real culture of safety and competition in safety by companies. So now controlling for the miles traveled, there were 5 times more fatalities in the 1960s than there are today. So there's been a huge impact in terms of safety and our reliance and our willingness to pay extra for more safety. So this same shift has to take place online with regulations and competition and new technologies to help protect users, and also more of a culture of safety so that everyone understands what they're doing and looks for websites and for devices that are more safe.
In a publication to the MIT Press Reader, you say that putting our personal information into a website is also a bit of a leap of faith. Trust is often described as a leap of faith. You give the example of Ashley Madison, a website with the express purpose of enabling married people to cheat with one another. I'm not sure whether the website still exists, but...
It does, and it's even more popular than ever.
Oh.
I use this example not because I was ever a customer. I always have to say that. And I can say that I can prove that I wasn't a customer because even though the whole point of the website was to offer a discreet way for married people to commit adultery, the security was so bad that all 37 million usernames were leaked online. And of course, with devastating results for the people. Even it actually turns out not that many people were successful in their cheating, but having your name on the list did not look good if your spouse found out, of course. The problem is twofold. It's difficult for a website to prove that it has good security. And so if you can't prove that you have good security or compete on it, there's less incentive to invest in good security. And also, the downside is not that large. Ashley Madison was sued for over $400 million, but in the end, the lawsuit yielded just $11.2 million. So the downside wasn't very big. And as I said at the beginning, this is really an example of the trust paradox. Many people didn't say, don't rely on a website like Ashley Madison, but they actually used this to find out that such an opportunity exists. And as I said, now that it has more users than ever.
A more recent example of digital trust is contact tracing apps on the internet. Contact tracing is not new, it's a standard public health tool. It was a powerful tool in combating corona. Yet in many countries around the world, tracing apps are misused to check on people's whereabouts, sometimes very intimate personal data. The most recent example is the STRS contact tracking app that Qatar forced World Cup attendees to use, giving Qatar authorities remote access to users' pictures and videos, and an ability to read, erase or modify data. By the way, I've been told that STRS is Arabic for precaution. Digital trust, is there?
Well, I would certainly use precaution in using the app. I mean, look, these contact tracing apps were meant very simply to determine if someone was in contact with someone else who tested positive as a way of fighting the pandemic. I'm not as positive in all countries that it was really successful because people were worried about privacy. And there are some legitimate questions because it relied or can rely on location and who you're associated with. But in most countries, the contact tracing app used technology developed by Google and Apple, which was very privacy preserving. It didn't keep track of your location. It didn't tell you the person you were in contact with. But as a paradox, even though many users give up far more personal information on a daily basis than was given to these apps, there was low trust. And in some countries, usage was just too low to make a difference. Here in Switzerland, adoption was under 30%. So it likely didn't make that much of a difference. But on the other hand, as you pointed out, for Qatar, in some countries, the worries were realized and the data is being used for more than just contact tracing. And that really adds to the lack of trust. When people hear these examples, I think they don't just say, well, that's happening in Qatar. They worry, well, what about, is that happening here? Should I use a contact tracing app or the next iteration of such an app?
More than 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are created every day. And quintillion, 2.5 with 17 zeros. So numerous companies and organizations hold vast amounts of data. In July 2020, the European Court of Justice ruled that data protection by what was then called the EU-US Privacy Shield was held inadequate from a privacy perspective. This was 2 years ago. Over the past 2 years, have we become more confident that data are being used in ways we can control or consent to?
I would say yes and no. I think Europe has really led the way with the general data protection regulation, the GDPR, that is very user-centric and gives us more ability to consent and control our data. But it's harder to control what happens when the data is moved out of the EU for processing in the United States or in other countries. And that's the issue behind the Privacy Shield. What's happening when Apple data goes back to California to the headquarters? Is it subject to the same controls as in Europe? Because overall, it's difficult for us to know what our data is being used for. Privacy policies tend to outline the basics of what can be done, but they're not very specific. They may say, we can share this data with third-party companies for processing, but they don't always say which companies, which data, and what's being done with it. And the result is that we're never quite sure. So sometimes we see ads for something that's very coincidental to what we are doing or saying. So people sometimes think that the companies are listening on the smartphones or the Alexa devices. But I think it just shows how much data the companies have and how good they are now at using it and targeting it. There have been some studies that have shown that the phones aren't listening to us. It's important to say. But those kinds of things have an impact on trust, and I think companies have to take all of this into account in the way that they're presenting to us to help build up trust, not just for themselves, but for the general digital economy. And if they don't, I think that's where regulations start to step in. That's happened in other industries, as I mentioned, and that's going to be happening here as well.
You just mentioned the European GDPR directive. Did the directive deliver to its promises?
The fact that we can consent more and that we have a better understanding when we go to a new website, we see something that we might have to click on or give permission to use the cookies, although that in some ways preceded the GDPR. So I think so, but it still leaves open the question that is very hard for us to tell, because the data is out there being stored, being processed, being used in ways that it's very hard for us to get a grip on. So the jury is still out a bit, but I think the attempt was very worthwhile. Other countries, I think, are or should be following that example.
Michael, in your line of work, what are the future challenges if it comes to trust?
Well, I think that the next wave of the internet is going to be the Internet of Things. These are going to be devices that we're using that typically have sensors built into them, whether it's cameras on your doorstep to see who's there, or if someone's taking your Amazon delivery. There are devices on the streets, facial recognition cameras and software increasingly. So I think it's going to be more challenging, and I don't think all of the lessons of the internet of websites and services online have all been learned. And I think that the companies and the governments have to really think hard about this as these technologies spread, because some of them, like self-driving cars that are online, are really going to have an impact on our physical being, not just our privacy.
Michael, thank you very much for being available today. Thanks for your time and your insights, and wish you success and good luck in your work.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure talking about this. I think it's an important topic for our times. It's going to continue to be important, so it was a pleasure to share some thoughts.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Trust Talk. We would be very grateful if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Don't miss out on future travels around trust, and subscribe to this channel or visit us on our website, trusttalk.co, or on Twitter @trusttalkco. We look forward to seeing you again.